हेलो एवरीवन, वेलकम टू माय यूट्यूब चैनल द सोलफुल डायरी। आज की वीडियो में हम बात करेंगे विलियम गोल्डिंग और उनकी नॉवल द लॉर्ड ऑफ फ्लाइज के बारे में। नॉवल को डिस्कस करने से पहले जान लेते हैं ऑथर के बारे में। William Golding, or in full Sir William Gerald Golding. He was born on 19 September 1911 at St. Columb Minor near Newquay, Cornwall. He died in England on 19th June 1993. He was an English novelist who won the 1983 Nobel Prize for Literature. He attracted a cult of followers, especially among the youth of the post World War II generation. Notable works: Darkness Visible, Free Fall, Lord of the Flies, Pitcher Martin, The Inheritors, The Spire. Educated in Marlborough Grammar School, where his father taught, he graduated from Brasenose College, Oxford in 1935. He worked at a settlement house and in a small theatre companies and then became a schoolmaster at Bishop Wordsworth School, Salisbury. Golding's first published novel was Lord of the Flies, 1954, the story of a group of schoolboys isolated on a coral island who revert to savagery. Its imaginative and brutal depiction of the rapid and inevitable dissolution of social mores aroused widespread interest. The Inheritors, 1955, set in the last days of Neanderthal man, in another story of the essential violence and depravity of human nature. The guilt-filled reflections of a naval officer, his short torpedoed who faces an agonizing death, are the subject of Pincher Martin, 1956. Two other novels, Free Fall and The Spire, 1964, also demonstrate Golding's belief that man produces evil as a bee produces honey. अब novel को discuss करते हैं. The story deals with a group of schoolboys who are on a desert island. Furthermore, these boys try to form their own society on this island. The major Lord of the Flies themes are power struggle and rebellion. Ralph is the leader of the group. Ralph believes that the main goals of the group should be fun, survival, and smoke signal maintenance. The smoke signal could attract the attention of ships or boats. Moreover, Ralph gives daily tasks to boys. However, the boys lose interest in those tasks like building shelters. The preference of boys is to hunt pigs and play. Jack is a boy who tries to defy Ralph's authority. When this happens, the boys go into chaos. Consequently, the island is set on fire. Towards the end of Lord of the Flies, a ship rescues the boys. The story opens with a young boy, Ralph and Piggy. Furthermore, a group of boys are stranded on an island. The other major Lord of the Flies characters are Jack and Simon. Ralph believes rescue will arrive soon. However, Piggy believes in organization as they may be stuck here for some time. Most noteworthy, Ralph becomes the leader of the group after the boys choose him. The choice of Ralph being the leader is not acceptable to all. Jack and some other boys do not choose Ralph. Ralph forms a strict form of organization. Ralph wants boys to enjoy their freedom. Moreover, he believes that working together will help them survive. Furthermore, Ralph emphasizes on the maintenance of the smoke signal to attract rescuers. Ralph, Jack, and Simon are popular leaders on the island. As a consequence, their partnership is complex. Most boys refrain from doing any work. These boys would rather play and sleep than work. This is because there are no adults present on the island. Once Jack and a group of boys go hunting, as a result, there was no maintenance of signal fire and it goes out. Soon, a boat passes by, but it does not see the boys. Jack and the boys return after hunting a pig. Ralph complains to Jack about the signal fire. Consequently, Jack becomes angry and beats Piggy. This is because Jack cannot pick a fight with Ralph. Boys believe that the monster is real. As a result, Ralph arranges a meeting of boys. Jack tries to remove Ralph from power, but the boys refuse. Consequently, Jack goes away in anger and decides to form his own tribe. More and more began joining the tribe of Jack. This was because Jack and his hunters gave roast pigs to eat. Furthermore, Jack's group were now painting their faces and behaving in a primitive manner. In contrast, Ralph's group was full of order and rules. Simon sometimes gets mental attacks. Once he observes Jack's tribes perform a rituals with a pig's head. Furthermore, flies were swarming this head. Simon refers to it as the Lord of the Flies. This is where things become ugly in the novel. Simon discovers proof that the monster is not real. When he goes in to inform Jack's tribe, they attack him and kill him. This is because they thought Simon was a monster. Ralph's small group decides to confront Jack's group. Then a fight breaks out between Jack and Ralph. In the midst of confusion, Ralph runs away. Jack then decides to set the trees on fire in order to catch Ralph. As Ralph panics, a British naval officer finds him, and the entire ship rescues all the remaining boys. This novel shows how young boys try to develop a system of organization and failure. Characters: The Lord of the Flies, the name given to the source head that Jack's gang impales on a stake and erects in the forest as an offering to the beast. The Lord of the Flies comes to symbolize the primordial instincts of power and cruelty that take control of Jack's tribe. Sam and Eric are twin older boys on the island who are often referred to as one entity, Samneri, and who throughout most of the Lord of Lies remains loyal supporters of Ralph. Sam and Eric are easily excited, regularly finish one another's sentences, and exist within their own small group of two. Like Ralph and Piggy, Sam and Eric participate in the death of Simon, but insist that they left the dance early too ashamed to admit what really happened after Jack leaves to start his own tribe. The twins are two of the few boys who remain with Ralph and Peggy to help maintain the signal fire and look after the little ones. They bravely go with Ralph and Peggy to get the glasses back from Castle Rock, but after Peggy's death they are covered and manipulated into joining Jack's tribe. Sam and Eric try to warn Ralph about Jack and Roger's bloodlust, but they are physically dominated the next day and reveal Ralph's hiding spot in the underbrush. Roger, introduced as a quiet and intense older boy, Roger eventually becomes a sadistic and brutal terrorist over the course of Lord of the Flies. Midway through the book, Roger's cruelty begins to surface in an episode where he terrorizes the little Henry by throwing rocks at him. Still beholden to the rules of the society, Roger leaves a safe distance between the rocks and the child, but we see his moral code beginning to crack. As Jack gains power, Roger quickly understands that Jack's brutality and willingness to commit violence will make him a powerful and effective leader. When he learns that Jack plans to torture Alfred for no apparent reason, he thinks about the possibilities of irresponsible authority. Rather than trying to help Wilfred or find out Jack's motivation, Roger gives into the delirious abandonment of senseless violence when he releases the boulder that kills Piggy. He then descends upon the twins, threatening to torture them. The next day, the twins Samneric tell Ralph, "You don't know Roger, he's a terror." Piggy is the first boy Ralph encounters on the island after the crash and remains the most true and loyal friend throughout Lord of Lies. An overweight, intellectual, and talkative boy, Piggy is the brains behind many of Ralph's successful ideas and innovations, such as using the conch to call meetings and building shelters for the group. Piggy represents the scientific and rational side of humanity, supporting Ralph's signal fires and helping to problem solve on the island. However, Piggy's asthma, weight, and poor eyesight makes him physically inferior to the others, making him vulnerable to scorn and ostracism. Pickett is also the only boy who worries about the rules of English civilization, namely what the Grotman scrubs will think when they find Savage Boy. Piggy believes in rules, timelines, and order, and as the island descends into brutal chaos, Piggy's position comes under threat of intense violence. Piggy's independence and thoughtfulness prevent him from being fully absorbed by the group, so he is not as susceptible to the mob mentality that overtake many of the other boys. However, like Ralph, Piggy cannot avoid the temptations of savagery on the island. The morning after the frenzied dance, Piggy and Ralph both admit to taking some part, although they remain vague in the attack and murder of Simon. While Piggy tries to convince himself that Simon's murder was an accident, his participation suggests that his willingness to be accepted by the group led him to betray his own morals and better judgment. Piggy's death suggests that intellectualism is vulnerable to brutality, while Simon's death can be viewed as an accident or an escalation of mob mentality. Piggy and murder is the most intentional and inevitable on the island, and the moment when the group's last, the civilization and humanity serve. Simon. Whereas Ralph and Jack stand at opposite ends of the spectrum between civilization and savagery, Simon stands on an entirely different plane from all other boys. Simon embodies a kind of innate spiritual human goodness that is deeply connected with nature and in its own way as primal as Jack's evil. The other boys abandon moral behavior as soon as civilization is no longer there to impose it upon them. They are not innately moral. Rather, the adult world, the treatment of punishment for misdeeds, has conditioned them to act morally. To an extent, even the seemingly civilized Ralph and Piggy are products of social conditioning, as we see when they participate in the hunt dance. In Golding's view, the human impulse towards civilization is not as deeply rooted as the human impulse towards savagery. Unlike all other boys on the island, Simon acts morally not out of guilt or shame, but because he believes in the inherent value of morality. He behaves kindly toward the younger children, and he is the first to realize the problem posed by the beast and the Lord of the Flies. That is, that the monster on the island is not a real physical beast, but rather a savagery that lurks within each human being. The source head on the stake symbolizes the idea as we see in Simon's vision of head speaking to him. Ultimately, this idea of the inherent evil within each human being stands as the moral conclusion and central problem of the novel. Against this idea of evil, Simon represents a contrary idea of essential human goodness. However, his brutal murder at the hands of the other boys indicates the scarcity of the good amid an overwhelming abundance of evil. Jack, the strong willed egomaniacal Jack, is the novel primary representative of instinct of savagery, violence, and the desire for power. In short, the antithesis of Ralph. From the beginning of the novel, Jack desires power above all other things. He is furious when he loses the election to Ralph and continually pushes the boundaries of his subordinate role in the group. Early on, Jack retains the sense of moral propriety and behavior that society instilled in him. In fact, in school, he was the leader of the choir boys. The first time he encounters a pig, he is unable to kill it, but Jack soon becomes obsessed with hunting and devotes himself to the task, painting his face like a barbarian and giving himself over to bloodlust. The more savage Jack becomes, the more he is able to control the rest of the group. Indeed, apart from Ralph, Simon, and Piggy, the group largely follows Jack in casting off moral restraint and embracing violence and savagery. Jack's love of authority and violence are intimately connected as both enable him to feel powerful and exalted. By the end of the novel, Jack has learned to use the boys' fear of the beast to control their behavior, a reminder of how religion and superstition can be manipulated as instruments of power. Ralph is the athletic, charismatic protagonist of Lord of the Flies, elected the leader of the boys at the beginning of the novel. Ralph is the primary representative of order, civilization, and productive leadership in the novel. While most of the other boys initially are concerned with playing, having fun, and avoiding work, Ralph sets about building huts, and thinking of ways to maximize their chances of being rescued. For this reason, Ralph's power and influence over the other boys are secure at the beginning of the novel. However, as the group gradually succumbs to savage instincts over the course of the novel, Ralph's position declines precipitously while Jack's rises. Eventually, most of the boys except Piggy leave Ralph's group for Jack's, and Ralph is left alone to be hunted by Jack's tribe. Ralph's commitment to the society of adults, in a sense, this strength gives Ralph a moral victory at the end of the novel. When he casts the Lord of Lies to the ground and takes up the stake, it is impaled on to defend himself against Jack's hunters. In the earlier part of the novel, Jack is unable to understand why other boys would give in to base instincts of bloodlust and barbarism. The sight of the hunters chanting and dancing is baffling and distasteful to him as the novel progresses. However, Ralph, like Simon, comes to understand that savagery exists within all the boys. Ralph remains determined not to let the savagery overwhelm him, and only brief does he consider joining Jack's tribe in order to save himself. When Ralph hunts a boar for the first time, however, he experiences the exhilaration and thrill of bloodlust and violence. When he attends Jack's feast, he is swept away by the frenzied dancers on the edge of the group and participates in the killing of Simon. This first hand knowledge of the evil that exists within him, as within all human beings, is tragic for Ralph, and it plunges him into listless despair for a time. But this knowledge also enables him to cast down the Lord of the Flies at the end of the novel. Ralph's story ends semi tragically, although he is rescued and returned to civilization. When he sees the naval officer, he weeps with the burden of his new knowledge about the human capacity for evil. War and the Future of Mankind. Set during a global war, Lord of the Flies offers a view of what society might look like trying to rebuild after a large scale man made catastrophe. In their attempt to rebuild society, the boys cannot agree on a new order and eventually fall into savagery. Ralph comes to realize that social order, fairness, and thoughtfulness have little value in a world where basic survival is struggle, such as after a devastating war. The paratrooper who lands on the island reminds the reader that while the boys are struggling to survive peacefully on the island, the world at large is still at war, even in their isolation and youth. The boys are unable to avoid violence. In their descent into torture and murder, they mirror the warring world around them. Dangers of the mob mentality. Lord of the Flies explores the dangers of mob mentality in terrifying scenes of violence and torture. Early on, the boys sing, "Kill the pig, cut her, spill her blood." After a successful hunt, elevating this shared act of violence into a celebratory chant. By coming together as a mob, the boys transform the upsetting experience of killing an animal into a bonding ritual. Acting as one group, the boys are able to commit worse and worse crimes, deluding one another into believing in the potential danger posed by the beast justifies their violence. Similarly, the boys use war paint to hide their identities as individuals and avoid personal responsibility. Ralph, Piggy, and Samneric both fear and envy the hunters. Liberation into savagery. Their desire to be a part of the group leads to voluntary participation in the ritualistic dance and brutal killing of Simon. The mob's shared irrational fear and proclivity towards the violence results in a devastating act of ultimate cruelty. Man's inherent evil. The fact that the main characters in Lord of the Flies are young boys suggests the potential for evil is inherent even in small children. Jack, for example, is initially keen for rules and civility but becomes obsessed with hunting, frightened and empowered by the promise of violence. Jack's desire to control and subjugate proves him more powerful than his desire for empathy, intellect, and realizations, and Jack becomes a brutal and leader. Even Ralph and Piggy, who both strive to maintain their sense of humanity, ultimately join in on the mass murder of Simon, momentarily surrendering to the thrill of violence and mass hysteria. While Piggy tries to ignore their participation, Ralph is devastated when he realizes that he is no better than Jack or Roger and that he has a darkness inside as well. But the character of Simon suggests humans can resist their inherently violent tendencies. The only boy who never participates in the island savagery. Simon has the purest moral code and is able to remain an individual throughout Lord of the Flies. While the others consider him weak and strange, Simon stands up for Piggy and Littleton's help Ralph build the shelters and provides thoughtful and insightful assessment of their predicament. Simon recognizes that the beast is not a physical beast, but perhaps the darkness and innate brutality within the boys themselves. After a terrifying conversation within the Lord of the Flies, Simon recognizes the paratrooper as a symbol of fear and the boys as agents of evil and runs to tell the others. But Simon is never able to properly explain to the other boys before they beat him to death in a frenzy of excitement and fear. Struggle to build civilization. The struggle to build civilization forms the main conflict of Lord of the Flies. Ralph and Piggy believe that structure, rules, and maintaining a signal fire are the greatest priorities, while Jack believes hunting, violence, and fun should be prioritized over safety, protection, and planning for the future. While initially the boys, including Jack, agree to abide by rules, Ralph's rule and democratic decision making, the slow and thoughtful process of building an orderly society, proves too difficult for many of the boys. They don't want to help build the shelters, maintain the signal fire, or take care of the little ones. The immediate fun and visceral rewards of hunting, chanting, and dancing around the fire are more attractive than the work of building a sustainable society. Near the end of the novel, even Ralph is tempted by Jack's authoritarian regime regularly, forgetting why the fire and rescue is so important. Loss of innocence. As the boys on the island progress from well behaved, orderly children longing for rescue to cruel, bloodthirsty hunters who have no desire to return to civilization. They naturally lose the sense of innocence that they possessed at the beginning of the novel. The painted savages in chapter 12 who have hunted, tortured, and killed animals. Human beings are a far cry from the Guileless children swimming in the lagoon in chapter 3, but Golding does not portray their loss of innocence as something that is done to the children. Rather, it results naturally from their increasing openness to the innate evil and savagery that has always existed within them. Golding implies that civilization can mitigate but never swipe out the innate evil that exists within all human beings. The forest glade in which Simon sits in chapter 3 symbolizes this loss of innocence. At first, it is a place of natural beauty and peace, but when Simon returns later in the novel, he discovers the bloody source head impaled upon a stake in the middle of the clearing. The bloody offering to the beast has disrupted the paradise that existed before, a powerful symbol of innate human evil disrupting childhood's innocence. Civilization versus savagery. The central concern of Lord of the Flies is the conflict between two competing impulses that exist within all human beings: the instinct to live by rules, act peacefully, follow moral commands, and value the good of the group against the instinct to gratify one's immediate desires, act violently to obtain supremacy over others, and enforce one's will. This conflict might be expressed in a number of ways: civilization versus savagery, order versus chaos, reason versus impulse, law versus anarchy, or the broader heading of good versus evil. Throughout the novel, Golding associates the instinct of civilization with good and the instinct of savagery with evil. The conflict between The two insects is the driving force of the novel. Conflict between the two insects is the driving force of the novel, explored through the dissolution of the young English boy's civilized moral discipline behavior as they accustom themselves to a wild, brutal, barbaric life in the jungle. It is an allegorical novel, which means that Golden conveys many of his main ideas and themes through symbolic characters and objects. He presents the conflict between civilization and savagery and the desire for power. As the novel progresses, Golding shows how different people feel the influences of the instincts of civilization and savagery to different degrees. Peggy, for instance, has no savage feelings, while Roger seems barely capable of comprehending the rules of civilization. Generally, however, Golding implies that the instincts of savagery is far more primal and fundamental to the human psyche than the instinct of civilization. Golding sees moral behavior in many cases as something that civilization forces upon the individual, rather than a natural expression of human individuality. When left to their own devices, Golding implies people naturally revert to cruelty, savagery, and barbarism. This idea of innate human evil is central to Lord of the Flies and finds expression in several important symbols, most notably the beast and the sow's head on the stake. Among all the characters, only Simon seems to possess anything like a natural innate goodness. Motifs, biblical parallels. Many critics have characterized Lord of Lies as a retelling from the Bible. While that description may be an oversimplification, the novel does echo certain Christian images and themes. Golding does not make any explicit or direct connections to Christian symbolism in Lord of the Flies. Instead, these biblical parallels function as a kind of subtle motif in the novel, adding thematic resonance to the main ideas of the story. The island itself, particularly Simon's Glade in the forest, recalls the Garden of Eden in its status as an originally pristine place that is corrupted by the introduction of evil. Similarly, we may see the Lord of Lies as a representation of the evil, for it works to promote evil among humankind. Furthermore, many critics have drawn strong parallels between Simon and Jesus. Among the boys, Simon is one who arrives at the moral truth of the novel, and the other boys kill him sacrificially as a consequence of having discovered this truth. Simon's conversation with the Lord of Lies also parallels the confrontation between Jesus and the devil during Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness as told in the Christian Gospels. However, it is important to remember that the parallels between Simon and Christ are not complete and that there are limits to reading Lord of Lies purely as a Christian allegory. Save for Simon's two uncanny predictions of the future, he lacks the supernatural connection to God that Jesus has in Christian tradition. Although Simon is wise in many ways, this death does not bring salvation to the island. Rather, his death plunges the island deeper into savagery and moral guilt. Moreover, Simon dies before he is able to tell the boys the truth he has discovered. Jesus, in contrast, was killed while spreading his moral philosophy. In this way, Simon and Lord of the Flies as a whole echoes Christian ideas and themes without developing explicit, precise parallels with them. The novel's biblical parallel enhance its moral themes but are not necessarily the primary key to interpreting the story. Symbols, the beast. The imaginary beast that frightens all the boys stands for the primal instincts of savagery that exists within all human beings. The boys are afraid of the beast. Not only Simon reaches the realization that they fear the beast because it exists within each one of them. As the boys grow more savage, their belief in the beast grows stronger. By the end of the novel, the boys are leaving it sacrifices and treating it as a totemic god. The boy's behavior is what brings the beast into existence. So the more savagely the boy acts, the more real the beast seems to come. The signal fire. The signal fire burns on the mountain and later on the beach to attract the notice of passing ships that might be able to rescue the boys. As a result, the signal fire becomes a barometer of the boys' connection to civilization. In the early parts of the novel, the fact that the boys maintain the fire is a sign that they want to be rescued and return to society. When the fire burns low or goes out, we realize that the boys have lost sight of their desire to be rescued and have accepted their savage lives on the island. The signal fire thus functions as a kind of measurement of the strength of the civilized instinct remaining on the island. Ironically, at the end of the novel, a fire finally summons a ship to the island, but not the signal fire. Instead, it is the fire of savagery, the forest fire Logs gangs starts as part of its quest to hunt and kill Ralph. The conch shell. Ralph and Piggy discover the conch shell on the beach at the start of the novel and use it to summon the boys together after the crash separates them. Used in this capacity, the conch shell becomes a powerful symbol of civilization and order in the novel. The shell effectively governs the boys, meeting for the boy who holds the shell holds the right to speak. In this regard, the shell is more than a symbol, it is an actual vessel of political legitimacy and democratic power. As the island conch shell loses its as the island civilization erodes and the boys descend into savagery, the conch shell loses its power and influence among them. Ralph clutches the shell desperately when he talks about his role in murdering Simon. Later, the other boys ignore Ralph and throw stones at him when he attempts to blow the conch in Jack's camp. The boulder that Roger rolls in onto Piggy also crushes the conch shell, signifying the demise of the civilized instinct among almost all the boys on the island. Piggy's glasses. Piggy is the most intelligent boy in the group, and his glasses represent the power of science and intellectual endeavor in society. This symbol signifies it's clear from the start of the novel who the boys use the lenses from Piggy's glasses to focus on the sunlight and start a fire. When Jack's hunters raid Ralph's camp and steal the glasses, the savages effectively take the power to make fire, leaving Ralph's group helpless. Island. The island that the boys land on is paradoxical. It has a plenty of freshwater fruit, trees, pigs. It also has diverse landscapes, including a forest, a mountain, and a beach. Island is a symbol of a paradise similar to the Garden of Eden. It represents a blank state to form a society, whether it is better or worse than what the boys came from. थैंक यू। आई होप आज की वीडियो आपको पसंद है। कैसी लगे हमें कमेंट करके बताएं और आप हमें ये भी कमेंट करके बताएं कि आप आने वाले वीडियोस किस टॉपिक पर देखना चाहते हैं। अगर वीडियो अच्छी लगी तो लाइक शेयर एंड सब्सक्राइब टू माय चैनल। मिलते हैं कल एक और इन्फॉर्मेटिव वीडियो के साथ शाम 4 बजे। थैंक यू।